What's good, gamers? Right, for those of you who have been a viewer of the channel for a while, you know I have made it abundantly clear that I do not like the Balancer Relics. Not because I think the Balancer Relics in general are bad. They're obviously not bad. You know, it's an extra 40% damage increase as soon as you start the expedition. You obviously are tied to spamming L2, which just is not fun. And of course, a lot of people would disagree with that because, let's be honest, the Balancer Relics are an easy way to make a strong build.
Reason number 2. Look what I can do.
What? What does that have to do with me?
No. He's got a point.
Obviously, with this game, you're heavily reliant on RNG, and everyone knows that the RNG for the Relic system isn't the greatest. So anyway, my disdain for the Balancer Relics aside, I'm going to talk to you today about a couple of Balancer builds that I use consistently with the Wilder. These are tried and tested in both depth 5, well, I mean, they've been tested in all depths, but I have tested them in depth 5, and they do work really well. And they're not just going to be your standard two-handed, use the strongest weapon build. These are builds I find very fun to use because they do take a little bit of, I don't want to say skill because, I'm just spamming L2, but you need to use your brain when using them. So, the first build we're going to talk about, unfortunately this build does take quite a lot of heavy RNG to actually make work because you are looking for a very specific skill on any shield really, but you are looking for a very specific skill. This build is a Great Shield build. And you probably guessed it, we are looking for Shield Crash. Now, unfortunately, despite it being a chargeable Ash of War, it doesn't get buffed by the Godfrey icon, and it also doesn't get buffed by charge attack power-ups. So to buff this, you can only really find skill attack power-up, physical attack power-up, and melee attack power-up. The good thing about this is, when you're using the Ash of War, because you are technically guarding at the same time, you can use things like damage negation when successfully guarding. You can do things like successive attacks will boost from it. You can also have things like HP recovery upon guarding, or FP recovery on successful guarding. So yeah, as for the build, all I run is essentially the 2 Balancer Relics. So, we are running a true Balancer Slop build. In the middle, I always have the Night Invader because, if you get to 3 Night Invaders, that's an extra 21% plus damage because it's multiplicative, as you all well know. And then for your Deep Relics, I just have physical attack up +4 and a Dormant Power finds Great Shields. So yeah, as for damage negation, taking damage boost damage negation of full of course, successful guards boost damage negation, all 3 of those will work very well. Successive attack boost damage negation will also work very well. Any successive attack buff, any successive attack talisman, they will work really well. Skill attack power up, and really any kind of stamina buff. Obviously this is going to be a very heavy stamina using build because it's Shield Crash, and shields generally when you're using the Ash of War, they take a lot of stamina. I mean, most things take a lot of stamina anyway, so you will need to build your stamina quite well, so pick up any stamina buffs. But yeah, the build itself is fairly easy and fairly simple to use. And as you can see, it's very strong. Now, as for which Nightfarers are used, I personally like to use Wilder just because I prefer using his kit, but the Raider is probably better overall because he has more strength, and the shields, they have an A scaling in strength with a little bit of dexterity. They've got a D scaling in dexterity. Honestly, the Raider or the Guardian would both work really well. I just prefer using Wilder. Now, for the next build that we're going to talk about, essentially it's running a Great Bow build. Now, I know what you're thinking, this might actually be impossible to do solo. You would be wrong. In certain scenarios, it's actually very handy to keep a Great Bow with Rain of Arrows on, but also it works tremendously well in a trio. Now, as for the build basically is just running both Balancer builds. I run a Night Invader with it. I do miss out on my +1 grapple as Wilder, which honestly it kills me not using that, but it's worth it overall in the long run. And then for the Deep Relics, I just run physical attack up with whatever I can basically, but obviously one of those needs to have Dormant Powers Discovers Great Bows. Now, the Dormant Powers Discovers Great Bows, obviously that works really well. If you didn't want to run that, which you don't actually have to do because the amount of times you will find a Great Bow or a Golem Great Bow with Rain of Arrows on, you'll find it pretty much anywhere that has, the bow sections where you can just pick up a bow or a crossbow or whatever. So run into any camp, run into one of those little towers that have them, and you most likely going to find it. I just run Dormant Powers Discovers Great Bows just to make sure that I can find it. As for what passives to run with it, physical attack up, skill attack up, unfortunately it doesn't get buffed by melee attack up, and it also doesn't get buffed by attack power up when two-handing your weapon. The two-handed one, I think it should get buffed by that. but I'm sure there's a very technical reason why the developers decided not to buff it using that. The only other thing to take into consideration is when using the Balancer Relics, the melee attack power-up on the Balancer Relics, that will not buff the Ash of War of the Rain of Arrows on the Great Bow. Now, of course, against smaller enemies, it's mostly going to be useless. It's still going to work, because obviously if you get hit by even a few of those arrows, you are getting the full AR off each arrow. And honestly, the damage of the Great Bow is actually overpowered. Like, I don't understand how the damage actually works out. Like, for instance, on the one run I had a Great Bow that had like 571 AR. So each arrow hits, does it do 571? I'm not sure. It feels like it does because it does so much damage, but I'm not entirely sure. Now, on the smaller enemies, it's obviously going to be less useful than it is against bigger enemies. So aim to use the Ash of War against the bigger enemies that you find. You can still make it work against the smaller enemies. It's just not going to hit... The arrows aren't going to hit as many times as they would if they were hitting the big enemies. Now, there is one thing that you probably don't know, and it's actually something that most people don't know. The Radahn's Great Bow and any other Great Bow that has Rain of Arrows on, it's actually a little bit different. So when using the Radahn's Rain of Arrows, the grouping of the arrows are actually a lot tighter, so you can make it work against smaller enemies. And the grouping of the normal bows or the Erdtree Great Bow, the grouping of those Rain of Arrows is a lot larger. Now, the good thing about the Great Bow build is obviously you don't have to stick to skill attack ups. You can stick to anything that's ranged, any ranged talisman, any ranged passives, and all of those are going to buff it along with your Night Invaders and all that stuff. So yeah, gamers, those are my very fun and I want to say unique builds, because I don't see many people using them, especially in Depth 5. I think everyone's a little bit too scared to use something that's underpowered, even though they're not underpowered. Make a mistake, you know, and cost the team a whole run, which can happen. One person not pulling their weight can cost the team a whole run, which is a shame, you know, especially if they've just not built correctly, not even built for like damage or survivability. They've just come in hoping that their Balancer Slop's going to be found and they're going to win, which, you know, it doesn't always work like that. So, gamers, if you're still here, feel free to drop a sub. That does help me out massively, and I do appreciate it. I'll catch you on the next one. Stay safe. Big love. Peace.